Hello everyone. In this video we're going to talk about creating our own unique hybridized sort of phaser effect inside of Bitwig Studio. So this video is falling outside of all of the course numbers. I probably should have put this in section 4 or section 3, but at this point I honestly don't feel like going back and renumbering everything. But in order to understand this video, you will have had to go through section 3 and section 4, and even section 1 to understand concepts such as phase, to understand parallel processing, and to understand filters and modulators. Okay, so those are the things you need to understand in order to build a phaser. I'll try to go through all of those things at a very surface level, but if you are at some point confused, I would encourage you to go back and watch those other videos. So Bitwig doesn't come with a built-in phaser. It comes with a lot of phase-based effects, but not an actual dedicated phaser. So the first thing a lot of people would do is go out and grab a plugin if they want that effect, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally cool. That's totally fine. Honestly, what we're doing in this video is just kind of geeking out a little bit. And, you know, I would do this on my own, so I figured I might as well show you guys as well to those who are interested. So here's the tall phaser. This is what it looks like. I'm going to play back first without the phaser effect in, and then we'll play it so you can hear it. Now let's kick in the phaser. Okay, so that's what a classic phaser sounds like, and that's going to kind of be our reference point as we go through and talk about a variety of phase effects and then eventually setting up our own. So also remember that this tau phaser is based and modeled after an analog phaser, so it's going to be impossible for us to get this exact sound, but we will be able to come kind of close, and actually we'll be able to make something that's totally unique and original to us. So the first effect that the phaser is very closely related to is the flanger. Okay, and we have very similar parameters here. The only difference is that on the phaser, there is no time setting. On the flanger, we're actually setting that difference in terms of milliseconds of phase. So the flanger is taking the signal, and in a way, it's duplicating it, and it's duplicating it just slightly later, okay, just by a tiny, tiny bit. And you can see that we can only go up to 27.5 milliseconds here, which again is so quick. It's not almost even, audible. And so we can try to dial this in to get it to sound similar to the phaser. We have an LFO, which is similar to the speed, only inside of this device we have more control, like amount, rate, and we can change the type of LFO if we want. We'll leave it as a sine wave because this is obviously a sine wave. We have a width parameter. We have a feedback parameter. So the only difference is really that time setting. All right, so let's try to dial this in and get it something similar to like what we have. Let me just review this real quick. Okay, cool, I have that sound in my head. Let's try to start working with the flanger now. The trickiest part is getting this time setting correct. Okay, so now we can compare the two. They're not going to be super similar. Okay, so not super similar, but not super different either. And really the difference when we talk about why the phaser isn't using a time control, you'll realize that the phaser and the flanger are super close. So that could be one possible alternative, is you can really try to dial in this flanger. You even have two different feedback settings if you want to try to make it somewhat close to a phaser. I've made a couple of other phased-based effects so you could just see and hear what they sound like. This one I've just stacked a bunch of rotary devices, and the rotary is a lot like an auto pan that gives you 3 different parameters, and if you put these all somewhat close but slightly different, it's going to impart different sorts of phase relationships. So imagine going from left to right really hard and then dropping in another auto panner that's not quite as extreme or that's going at a different speed, and you're suddenly introducing all of these different stereo phase effects. So it can sound very similar to a phaser or a flanger if you can get it just right. So here's what we've got. Let's take a listen. And I'll start to add these in. So I hope you can hear from that it doesn't sound like a phaser, it doesn't sound like a flanger. It sounds like something totally unique, but it's using that idea of phase relationships to impart that kind of motion that we so often associate with things like the phaser and the flanger. So for my second example, I've done something similar, only this time I've used the frequency shifter. So the frequency shifter is quite different because the frequency shifter is actually grabbing onto content inside of the frequency domain and hyping it or shifting it and moving it around, especially if you can dial in these settings just right. So I'll let you guys hear what this sounds like and then encourage you to go out there and experiment a little on your own. Let's take a listen to this guy. Okay, very cool. For my third example, going off of that frequency shifter idea, I've actually taken a comb filter. And you can imagine a comb filter kind of being like, if this is our like x-axis here, a comb filter on the frequency spectrum is going to be like this. All right, it's going to take a bunch of points and hype it. I can even show you quickly in case you're confused. Like if I have an EQ5, we can imagine a comb filter kind of being like, sorry guys, I'll just go as quick as I possibly can here. This is a very gross example of what it is, but just to explain it a little bit further. All right, so we can kind of imagine a comb filter looking something like this, and then all of these guys moving left and right, so it's constantly grabbing onto and amplifying, or you could do it the opposite way if you wanted and actually have it pull parts out. It's going to end up just, you know, hyping the regions in between. So that's basically like what a comb filter is going to look like. And so when you listen to something like a phaser, it really has the sound of, you know, a bunch of frequencies being grabbed onto and either hyped or cut. And a lot of that is because of that phase relationship. So let's listen to what I was able to come up with here using an LFO, and then inside of the LFO I have a few different comb effects, comb filters, And I've also added some distortion. And by adding that little bit of distortion with my macro knobs, I'm going to be able to control just how much of that extra dirt I want to try to give it more of that analog sort of towel phaser sound. So here is what this sounds like. So obviously that might be going to a little bit of an extreme. It actually is going a little bit more crazy than what a phaser is doing, because I'm using all of these LFOs to like control a bunch of different things, as you can see here. It's not just like one or two parameters the LFO is controlling like with a classic phaser effect. All right, so now let's actually talk about the phaser and how it works. So we've talked about phase relationships, and really that is the basis of a phaser. What a phaser utilizes is something called an all-pass filter, and I'll send a link, or I'll set a link in the comment section or description to an article on all-pass filters. But basically an all-pass filter, I'll use this guy first before going into my other example. Not too many plugins have access to all-pass filters, because all-pass filters really don't do that much except at very specific points. And an all-pass filter are basically a low-pass, a high-pass filter set to the same frequency in parallel, where one has the phase flipped. All right, one of those filters. If that doesn't make any sense, don't worry, we're going to get to it. But let's just quickly put on, get like a super square type sound going here. Okay, that works for me. And then we do have access to a all-pass filter in here. And you've probably used this before in Massive and been like, man, this doesn't sound like much of anything. But just listen right around the top here. Okay, so you just listen to that and you think, wow, that's pretty lame. That doesn't really do much of anything. But let me just show you how crazy you can actually make all-pass filters work inside of something as simple as Massive. So here it is. I don't really use this program that much, so don't go on me too hard for not making like a super rich or crazy patch. But what I've done here is I have a patch, and right now I don't have either filter in, and I don't have the phaser in. And here's just what the sound is. Okay, very simple. As you can tell, it's pretty much a couple of square waves and some that are kind of morphing from square to saw. We have a little bit of a pitch relationship set up here, and Massive comes with a phaser effect. So let's listen to what their phaser effect sounds like on this. Okay, so kind of lame, right? Pretty simple, not that much going on. But now let's take a listen to what happens when I just utilize a couple of all-pass filters with the resonance and with a bunch of different LFOs that I have set up. And you can see how some of these LFOs have very different phase relationships as well. So let's take a listen to this, and I want you to just tell me which is a cooler sound, using the FX phaser or using two all-pass filters with some LFOs. Take a listen to this. because I have so many different LFOs controlling different parameters, we're not going to get that cyclical modulation occurring that often. So again, this is just using two basic all-pass filters, which on their own don't sound like much, but that is the essence of a phaser effect. So you can even hear how that kind of sounds like a phaser without even actually utilizing one at all. All right, I thought I'd show that, guys, to you just so you can see how easy it is to set something like that up. Now let's go ahead and create one from scratch so you can actually see what it's going to look like to make one of these. I also want to quickly show you that if you have a effect or a synthesizer like Absinthe that lets you do this, I can actually go in here to the patch and I can create two all-pass filters, and then I can route them to an LFO, and we can again create our own sort of phaser effect without actually having to use just a phaser. We can do it with all-pass filters and an LFO. So here's what that sounds like. Sorry. So obviously the issue with that is that we can't really control the dry wet on that effect. But if we put this in an FX layer, we very easily could make a dry, and then we could have this version of the Absinthe going. So let's go ahead and make one ourselves. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, maybe I should just start this all the way over for you guys. I'm going to start it out with an LFO because we know we need an LFO to move something. Right now we don't know what that something is, but we'll get to that. And so I'll go in here, I'll go to my audio modulators, LFO, and I guess we'll make it really complicated, and I'll put an LFO inside of an LFO. The reason for doing this is that if I put anything now into the next spot, like a chorus, I can actually use either this first LFO mod to control something, or, oops, sorry, I put that in the wrong place if I put this up here. I can now use either this first LFO to control anything I want, or the second LFO to control anything I want, assuming that I nest everything appropriately. So I'm going to just nest everything inside of this second LFO. And what we're going to do is create a all-pass filter ourselves. So how does that work? It's a high pass, it's a low pass filter with the phase flipped on one. So it's pretty easy. What I'm going to do is start by adding an FX layer, so we can actually start to implement a little bit of parallel processing. From here, I'm going to drop on two tool devices. And on the first one, look at this. I have an ability to flip the phase. So I'll go ahead and do that. And following each of my tool devices, I'm also just going to turn everything down. When you're working with these, remember, you're going to work with pairs. So try to get these settings to be identical if you can. This is at -8.64. -8.64, cool. So I'm going to add in, for the first example, I'm going to put in an EQ2. Maybe we'll use an EQ5 just because it's bigger. For the second one, I'm going to put an EQ5 as well. And then just to not confuse myself, let's rename this low pass phase flip. And we'll just rename this one high pass. Okay, sorry guys, so ran into a little bit of a glitch there. We're going to try this again and hopefully it doesn't happen. So I'm going to drop in two different instances of the tool. I will turn this one down by 9, that's fine. And we'll turn this one down by 9 if we can. You can also just command click if you want. All right, there we go. So now I'm going to add an EQ5. And now it's finally moving. So I'm going to pull this all the way down, okay? I'm going to put it to 20, actually. Or let's not even go that extreme. Let's go to 22 hertz. Okay, perfect, 22, that's where we're at. Now I'm going to flip the phase on this first one. So I'm going to rename this low pass phase flip. And there we go. We flipped the phase on that one. For the other tool, we're not going to flip the phase, and we're going to add an EQ5, and we're now going to put on a high pass, put that down to 0.71, and go to 22, which is where our other one is set at. Okay, cool. So we can see that these are identical. So to actually get this to work like just a traditional classic all pass filter, I could go here into the macros and I could map this one up. I'll put it up 100. And I'll take the other one and do the exact same thing. All right, and now if I turn this frequency knob, hopefully you can see this. You can see that moving there on the right. Okay, in that one, and on this one, it's moving to the left. So as we start to hit like a crossover point here, we're going to hear that effect. So let's play this back and listen. And you can see the way that these are cross-fading across. It's an all-pass filter because all the frequencies are being allowed to pass. It's just that at a certain point, we're flipping the phase. And so that's what's causing that very interesting effect to occur. So what I could do now is I could add in a bunch more. And we'll just add in one more for this example. So again, we need another pair, and this is high pass. And this time we're going to do basically the same thing, only we're going to slightly change the frequency. So I'm going to call this frequency 1, or let's do it so I actually can see. Freak 1. This will be freak 2. We'll do freak 3. And we'll do a freak 4. Okay, perfect. So here we go on our second option here, our second series. This time, let's just do it the other way around. We'll call this high pass PF, and this will be just a traditional low pass. Okay, so that one's going to have this. We'll go back in. And now you can start to use anything you really want. You could use the ladder. You could use the EQ2. You could use the filter. For this case, I'll just keep using the EQ5 to keep it simple so you guys can see. So this is going to be our high pass. And this time we'll pull the high pass all the way up to 20K. And maybe we'll add a little bit of resonance just for fun, 1.07. All right, and then we'll go into the other one. Add another EQ5, have our low pass here at 20. And let me just check the other setting. It was 1.07, so we'll make this at 1.07 just for kicks. All right, and now I'm going to, again, map these knobs out. This time we'll be pulling down. I'll pull down 100. Cool, and we'll take the other one and we'll also pull it down 100. Okay, and let me just turn the amplitude down on both of these as well because we are just creating multiple parallel chains. All right, and now we can solo these two out. Okay, awesome. So we know that one is working. At this point, I'm going to pause the video and I'm just going to add in 2 more. Okay, so we're going to have a grand total of, what's it going to be, 8 of these different chains going on. Okay, so I've gone ahead and finished that up. I also want you to notice that to add a little bit of width, I've just thrown a bit of panning here that's going in opposite directions for each of these pairs. You're really going to have to take your time and get those in properly if you actually are going for a very particular effect. And in the case of my last couple here, I set them to different frequencies. So I set my final pair to 300 hertz, and my third pair I set to, I think, 7K. Okay, so you can adjust these, and then you just have to be careful with the percentage that you use on your mapping. So in the case of the fourth one, I used 75, and that seemed to work quite well. Okay, so it's not going too crazy above and beyond. All right, so that's basically the start of this. Now the trick, and this is where it gets fun, is that we can use these LFOs to actually control these frequency points. So I'm going to set my frequency points all to the center right now, or around there. It's fine. Doesn't have to be perfect. That's part of the fun of this. And I'm just going to map all of my LFOs to these macro knobs. Okay, so here we go. LFO 1 is going to move this frequency here. Okay, that's good enough for me. I can slow it down a little bit. Can also add a tool control at the end to turn this down if we need to. Okay, so we can hear that first one working. Good enough for me. LFO 2 now. Maybe we'll go ahead and sync this one. Why not? Change the phase a little bit so that these are different. Awesome. Now for frequency number 3. Again, put the phase somewhere new. And then last but not least, frequency number 4. Let's actually set this to triplets. If you want, you can hear what it sounds like with them all pan center. Probably not as exciting. So we'll mess with the pannings. Oops. Okay, I probably screwed that up, but that's fine. So that right there is a pretty crude example of a phaser you can set up using your own built-in all-pass filters and a simple LFO changes. You can take this to really extremes though, because on some of these channels, some of these chains, you might want to add some distortion. You can maybe add a little bit of a chorus. You can add a little hint of a blur or something just to add some intrigue, just to add some variety. And you can really make some incredible phasers. I did one the other night and I spent about 2 hours just building up. Unfortunately, I deleted that project, so I didn't save it, but you can really go crazy here and you can add as many of these as you want. You know, you could have an 8-pole. Right now we have like a 4-pole, but you could add an 8-pole all at slightly different frequencies so that they're constantly coming into contact with one another. And, you know, really just have fun with this. You can use the LFOs to also manipulate other parameters on the LFO itself, etc. And if you wanted to, you could also have it, you know, manipulate resonance, and you can see now how the resonance is going up and down. You can do things like that, and it's just crazy. It's a lot of fun. You can do some really fun, funky things, and I encourage you to just experiment with it, because that's the only way you're ever going to tap into this program's full potential. So again, thank you so much for watching. I hope that this has been somewhat of a help for you. I know that we kind of jumped around all over the place, but sometimes that's what you have to do. And when your mind is just racing a million miles a minute, which mine does when I start working with this program and all of the built-in flexibility and options, I can kind of get sidetracked very easily. But I hope this video has been of some help and that you can now take this in totally new and creative directions. Take care.